They rejected my loan request for $5,000, said I wasn't worth the risk. 18 months later, I walked into that same conference room, not as a desperate borrower, but as the majority shareholder who'd just acquired their company. The board members who'd laughed at my business plan sat frozen in their leather chairs. I didn't come to gloat. I came to clean house. And I remembered every single face that had dismissed me that day. My name is Rachel Monroe. And until 6 weeks ago, I was a senior designer at Halberg Capital Solutions in Bretonville, Illinois. Not the kind of designer who makes things pretty. I built financial interfaces, the digital bridges between people and their money. I understood how a misplaced button could cost someone their overdraft fee, how a confusing menu could keep a single mother from accessing her funds. I was good at my job. Too good, apparently, for a 34-year-old woman who'd clawed her way up from community college. The restructuring email came on a Tuesday. Streamlining operations, they called it. Dean Porter, my department head, delivered the news with the same practiced sympathy he probably used to foreclose on homes. It's nothing personal, Rachel, just business dynamics. He couldn't even look me in the eye when he said it. 6 years of 70-hour weeks, of fixing their broken systems, of making their Stone Age banking software somewhat usable, reduced to business dynamics. I needed $5,000 to survive the transition. Not a fortune, just enough to keep my apartment, buy time to launch the financial platform I'd been developing nights and weekends. The platform that would help people like my neighbors access banking without the humiliation of begging for basic services. I knew every loan officer at Halberg. I'd designed the very forms they used. This should have been simple. The loan committee meeting was held in Conference Room B, the one with the view of the parking lot where I'd once slept in my car between double shifts. Dean was there, of course, along with Linda Crass, the branch director who still called email the email and printed out websites. 2 other board members whose names I'd never bothered learning sat at the far end, scrolling through their phones. Ms. Monroe, Linda began, pronouncing my name like it tasted bad. Your credit score is adequate. But without current employment and with no substantial collateral. I have a business plan, I interrupted, sliding my folder across the mahogany table. My platform already has a working prototype. I just need bridge funding. Dean actually laughed, a short, dismissive bark. Rachel, designing interfaces and running a fintech startup are completely different animals. You're asking us to invest in... What? An app for poor people? An app for underserved communities, I corrected, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. 40% of Americans can't access traditional banking. My platform would compete with our services. Linda finished. Why would we fund our own competition? The meeting lasted 12 more minutes. 12 minutes of condescension, of barely veiled insults about my limited vision and lack of real-world experience. The unnamed board members never looked up from their phones when they voted, unanimously, to deny my application. Dean had the audacity to pat my shoulder. Maybe try a credit union, he suggested. They're more suited to your demographic. My demographic. As if he hadn't seen me work until midnight fixing their garbage code. As if I hadn't saved them millions by catching the security flaw in their mobile banking system. As if I was just another desperate borrower, not someone who understood their business better than they did. I gathered my papers slowly, memorizing their faces. Not out of some grand plan for revenge. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was just trying not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But I looked at each of them. Dean with his smug half-smile. Linda adjusting her pearls. The board members already mentally onto their next rejection. Thank you for your time, I said, standing. Linda was already shuffling papers, preparing for the next applicant. Best of luck, Ms. Monroe. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. Your type always does. My type. I walked out of that building for what I thought would be the last time, past the security guard who used to joke about my late hours, past the marble lobby I'd helped design the digital displays for. The January wind hit me like a slap, but it was nothing compared to the cold I'd just left behind. I sat in my 10-year-old Honda, the one with the check engine light that never turned off, and stared at the building that had consumed 6 years of my life. They'd denied me $5,000, not because I was a bad investment, but because they couldn't imagine someone like me, someone who'd started as a night shift contractor, who'd learned to code on YouTube, who didn't have the right pedigree, could build something that mattered. They were wrong. They were all so catastrophically wrong. But sitting in that freezing car, watching employees I'd trained walk past without recognizing me, I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I had 3 weeks until eviction, $60 in my checking account, and a laptop full of code that might change everything if I could just survive long enough to prove it. The check engine light flickered, then stayed on. I laughed, actually laughed, at the perfect metaphor. Everything in my life was broken, warning lights everywhere, but I was still running, still moving. I put the car in drive and left Halberg Capital Solutions behind. For now. The eviction notice came faster than expected, 17 days, not 3 weeks. I stood in my doorway at 6 a.m., still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in, reading the yellow paper while my landlord avoided eye contact. "I'm sorry, Rachel," he mumbled. "New management company. They're not flexible about late payments." By noon, my life fit into 3 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases. 6 years in Brentonville. And this was all I had to show for it. I sold my furniture on Facebook Marketplace for a fraction of what I'd paid. My desk went for $40 to a college kid who didn't blink at the coffee stains. The couch I'd bought to celebrate my promotion became $60 in gas money. I moved into my car. Not temporarily, not just for a few nights. I lived in that Honda for 3 weeks before Tony Alvarez found me crying in a Walmart parking lot at 2 a.m. "Jesus Christ, Rachel," she said, knocking on my fogged-up window. "What the hell happened to you?" Tony and I had worked together briefly at Halberg before she'd quit to freelance. She was the only person who'd ever bothered to learn where I came from, who knew I taught myself SQL while working night shifts at a warehouse. She took one look at my laptop balanced on a milk crate in the back seat and made a decision that saved my life. "You're staying with me," she announced. "No arguments. My couch is yours until you figure this out." Pride is a luxury you can't afford when you're washing your hair in gas station bathrooms. I took the couch. To pay Tony back, I took any work I could find. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I cleaned houses in the suburbs, the kind with marble countertops and sub-zero refrigerators, owned by people who worked at places like Halberg, $10 an hour under the table, cash only. Tuesday and Thursday nights. I drove for a rideshare app, ferrying drunk college kids and tired nurses across town. Weekends. I wrote SEO content for pennies per word. 10 best credit cards for bad credit and how to rebuild after bankruptcy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was writing financial advice while my own bank account hovered near zero. Between shifts, on Tony's couch with her ancient laptop. I kept coding. My platform, ClearStep, became my obsession. My lifeline, my proof that I was more than the demographic Linda Crass had assigned me to. Every rejection letter I'd written for content mills, every mansion I'd scrubbed, every drunk passenger who'd forgotten to tip, it all fed the engine of my determination. "You're killing yourself," Tony said one night, finding me passed out over my keyboard at 3 a.m. "This isn't sustainable." "Neither is poverty," I shot back. She sat down beside me, looking at my screen. "Show me what you're building." For the next hour, I walked her through ClearStep, the peer-to-peer lending protocols, the blockchain verification that didn't require traditional credit scores, the interface designed for people who'd never felt welcome in a bank. Tony's expression shifted from concern to interest to something like awe. "This is... Rachel. This could actually work. I know it could work. I just need... money." She finished my sentence with a bitter laugh. The eternal catch-22. Need money to make money. We sat in silence, both understanding the wall I'd hit. Then Tony pulled out her phone. "My cousin runs a community organization in Pilsen. They've been looking for financial solutions for undocumented workers who can't get bank accounts. Maybe we start there. Not with banks or VCs, with the people who actually need this. It was a thread, thin as spider's silk, but I grabbed it with both hands. The next Saturday, instead of cleaning houses, I sat in a community center basement, demonstrating a bare-bones version of Clear Step to 30 skeptical faces. Tony translated my technical explanations into Spanish, adding her own flourishes. The questions came fast and sharp. What about fees? Security? What happens if ICE gets the data? I answered honestly. The app wasn't perfect. It was barely functional. But it was theirs in a way Bank of America would never be. Maria Gonzalez, who ran a food truck and kept her earnings in cash under her mattress, was the first to sign up for the pilot program. Then, her brother. Then, his neighbor. Word spread through WhatsApp groups and church networks, through quinceañera planning committees and soccer leagues. People who'd been invisible to the financial system suddenly had a way in. 3 months after that yellow eviction notice, I had 200 users and a problem. The app was growing faster than my laptop could handle. I needed servers, real development tools, actual infrastructure. I needed money. Crowdfunding, Tony suggested, watching me stress-eat ramen for the third night straight. Tell your story. Show them what you're building. Nobody wants to fund another financial app. Nobody wants to fund another financial app for rich people, she corrected. This is different. You're different. Use that. I recorded the video on my phone, sitting in Tony's kitchen with my laptop and a whiteboard. No fancy production, no polished pitch deck. Just me, exhausted and honest, explaining why I'd been sleeping in my car to build something that mattered. I talked about Maria and her food truck, about the nail salon owner who paid 30% fees to cash checking services, about every person who'd been told they weren't worth $5,000 by people who'd never missed a meal. I uploaded it on a Tuesday night, expecting nothing. By Wednesday morning, I had $3,000 in pledges. By Friday, 10,000. The comments section filled with stories. People who'd been denied loans, who'd paid predatory fees, who'd been told their money wasn't welcome in marble lobbies. Dean Porter would have called them poor people. I called them my first investors. The anger that had sustained me through those brutal months began to transform. It didn't disappear. It crystallized into something harder and more useful than rage. Purpose. Every dollar that came in felt like a vindication. Every new user proved what I'd known in that conference room seat. The problem wasn't my vision. It was theirs. Lying on Tony's couch, watching the funding counter tick upward. I thought about Linda Crass saying, "Your type always lands on their feet." She was right, but not in the way she'd meant it. My type, the overlooked, the underestimated, the denied. We didn't land on our feet. We built our own ground. The campaign hit $50,000 on a Sunday night. Tony opened a bottle of cheap champagne, and we toasted with coffee mugs. "What's next?" she asked. I pulled up my laptop, showing her an email I'd been saving. Found North Ventures wants to meet. They're interested in a seed round. How much? $500,000. Tony nearly dropped her mug. Holy shit. Rachel. I smiled, but my mind was already elsewhere, already planning, somewhere in Brentonville. Halberg Capital Solutions was closing for the weekend, secure in their marble lobby and their risk assessments. They had no idea what was coming. Neither did I, really. But I knew one thing. I wasn't asking for permission anymore. The Found North Ventures office occupied the 40th floor of a Chicago high-rise. All glass walls and exposed brick, trying desperately to look like Silicon Valley. I wore my only suit, the one I'd interviewed at Halberg 6 years ago, and carried a laptop held together with electrical tape. The contrast wasn't lost on me. Rachel Monroe? A woman my age with purple-streaked hair and expensive sneakers extended her hand. I'm Keiko Tanaka, senior partner. Your video made me cry on my morning run. I hadn't expected that. In the elevator, she explained how her grandmother had kept money in coffee cans, never trusting banks after the internment camps. Different story, same system, she said. Let's see if we can break it. The presentation went better than I'd dreamed. My scraped-together PowerPoint couldn't compete with their setup, but the numbers spoke louder than any design could. 800 users in 4 months. Average transaction value increasing weekly. Retention rate at 94%. When I showed the testimonial from Maria Gonzalez, now managing her food truck revenue through ClearStep instead of cash, Keiko's partner actually applauded. $500,000 might not be enough, Keiko said after 90 minutes of questions. You're going to scale faster than you think. We should talk about a Series A roadmap. I left that office with a term sheet and vertigo. On the train back to Brentonville, my phone buzzed with messages. The Tribune wanted an interview. TechCrunch had picked up the story, and buried in the flood, an email that made my blood run cold. From Dean Porter, Halberg, Capital Solutions. Subject: Congratulations and opportunity, Rachel. I've been following your impressive progress with ClearStep. We should discuss potential synergies. Halberg is very interested in strategic partnerships with innovative fintech solutions. Best, Dean. I stared at his name until the words blurred. Strategic partnerships. The same man who'd laughed at my app for poor people now wanted synergies. Delete it, Tony advised that night, reading over my shoulder. You don't need them anymore. But I didn't delete it. I archived it carefully, adding it to a folder I'd started labeled Evidence. The seed funding hit our account on a Tuesday. $500,000, more money than I'd ever seen. Enough to hire developers, rent servers, actually build the platform I'd sketched on napkins and coded on borrowed laptops. We moved fast. Tony became my COO, bringing her network of freelancers. We hired Marcus, a back-end engineer who'd been laid off from Wells Fargo for asking too many questions about their fee structures. Anna joined from a payday loan company, disgusted with what she'd been forced to sell to desperate people. Our office was a converted print shop in Pilsen, 5 miles and a universe away from Halberg's marble lobby. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by takeout and the memory of every rejection we'd faced. The user count climbed 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. Local news called us the anti-bank. I kept that article pinned above my desk. 3 months into our official launch, Halberg reached out again. This time, Linda Crass herself called. Rachel, dear, she began, the false warmth in her voice making my skin crawl. We've been watching your progress with great interest. Perhaps we were hasty in our initial assessment. You denied me $5,000, I said flatly. A pause. Business decisions are complex, but we're prepared to offer you something much more substantial now. A partnership deal. Integration with our systems. We could fast-track ClearStep to our entire customer base. Your customer base doesn't include my users. That's exactly why we need you. The mask slipped for a moment, desperation creeping in. Our younger customers are leaving. We need to modernize, and you've built something we couldn't. Come in next week, let's discuss numbers. I agreed to the meeting, not because I wanted their money, but because I wanted to see inside. Tony thought I was crazy, but she didn't understand. This wasn't about partnership, it was reconnaissance. Walking back into Halberg felt like returning to a crime scene. The same marble, the same portraits of dead white founders, the same security guard who now did a double take at my visitor badge. But I was different. My second-hand suit had been replaced by clothes bought with my own company's money. My laptop bag bore the ClearStep logo we'd designed ourselves. The conference room, not B, but the executive suite, told the whole story. 7 board members, including Dean and Linda, all trying to project confidence they didn't feel. The presentation they'd prepared showed Halberg's quarterly losses, their demographic crisis, their failed attempts at digital transformation. They needed ClearStep more than they wanted to admit. We're prepared to offer $2 million for a 40% stake, Linda announced, as if she were doing me a favor. I laughed. Actually laughed. ClearStep's current valuation is $8 million, and we're not for sale. Dean leaned forward. Rachel, be realistic. You need infrastructure, regulatory compliance, things only established institutions can provide. I need those things, I agreed. But I don't need them from you. The meeting devolved from there. They alternated between carrots and sticks, offering more money, threatening competitive action, reminding me how hard financial services could be without the right relationships. I took notes on everything, especially the veiled threats. As I stood to leave, Linda made one last attempt. You're being emotional about this. Rachel, don't let pride cloud your judgment. I turned at the door. It's not pride, it's memory. I remember sitting in conference room B, begging for $5,000 while you questioned whether people like me deserved access to capital. Now you're sitting here, bleeding customers, begging for access to technology you couldn't envision. The difference is, I'm not laughing at you. Then what are you doing? Taking notes. I left them in that executive suite, probably wondering what I'd meant. They'd find out soon enough. Back at our print shop office, my team was waiting. So, Marcus asked, did you tell them to fuck off? More or less. I pulled up my laptop. But more importantly, I learned something. They're weaker than they look. Stock price might be stable, but they're hemorrhaging young customers. Their digital infrastructure is held together with duct tape and prayers, and their board is scared. Anna looked up from her code. What are you thinking? I smiled, remembering Dean's condescending pat on my shoulder. I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. The local newspaper ran a story the next week. Clear Step rejects Halberg partnership, chooses independence. I made sure to mention the $5,000 loan denial. Public memory is short, but shame echoes longer in small towns. Halberg's stock dipped 2%. It was a start. That night, I updated my evidence folder and opened a new spreadsheet. At the top, I typed Acquisition Strategy, Project Clean House. Tony saw it over my shoulder and whistled low. You're really going to do it? They taught me everything I needed to know, I said, entering Halberg's public financial data. Business is business, nothing personal. But we both knew I was lying. This was personal. It had been personal since the moment they decided I wasn't worth $5,000. Now, with 10,000 users and growing, with venture capital and press coverage and a team that believed in the mission, I finally had the tools to make it business too. The marble lobby and leather chairs were still there, but the foundation underneath was cracking. All I had to do was find the right pressure points and push. Information is currency, and I started collecting it like a miser. Every former Halberg employee who joined ClearStep brought intelligence, not stolen files or proprietary data. Nothing that could land me in court, just observations, memories. The kind of institutional knowledge that nobody thinks to protect. Sarah Kim, who'd spent 3 years in Halberg's IT department before they outsourced her job, revealed their catastrophic technical debt. They're running COBOL systems from the 80s held together with middleware that breaks if you look at it wrong, she told me over coffee. Last year, they spent $2 million just keeping the lights on. Marcus tracked their customer attrition through public data and social media sentiment. Look at this, he said, pulling up a graph that showed a clear trend. Every quarter, they lose 3% of customers under 35. At this rate, their demographic pyramid will invert within 5 years. But the real intelligence came from an unexpected source. Janet Morrison, Halberg's longest-serving teller, reached out through LinkedIn. We met at a diner outside town, where she nervously shredded napkins while talking. I'm retiring next month, she said. 30 years at that place, and they're giving me a cake from Costco and a watch. Meanwhile, I watch Dean Porter drive a new Mercedes every year. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Don't be sorry. Be smart. She slid a folder across the table. Public records, shareholder reports, nothing confidential, nothing that could get me in trouble. But if you know how to read between the lines, I knew how to read between the lines. The reports painted a picture of a company in quiet crisis. Institutional investors were reducing positions. The board had approved executive bonuses while freezing hiring. Most damning, they'd taken on debt to maintain dividend payments, borrowing against future earnings that their own projections suggested wouldn't materialize. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Janet smiled, and for the first time, I saw the steel under her grandmother facade. "Because you were the only executive who ever asked my opinion about the user interface, and because Linda Crass once told me I should be grateful to have a job at my age." She stood to leave, then paused. "That 5,000 they denied you? I processed that rejection. I've regretted it ever since." Armed with information, I needed capital. Real capital, not just operating funds. I flew back to Chicago, but this time, I wasn't begging. ClearStep had grown to 50,000 users. Our monthly transaction volume exceeded 10 million. We were profitable, barely, but legitimately. "You want to raise how much?" Keiko's eyebrows climbed toward her purple hairline. 50 million, I repeated. "But not for ClearStep's operations. I want to create an acquisition fund." I laid out my vision. Financial services were consolidating. Small regional banks and credit unions were being devoured by giants. But what if we created an alternative? What if we acquired struggling institutions and transformed them using ClearStep's technology and philosophy? "And your first target would be?" "Halberg Capital Solutions." Silence stretched between us. Then Keiko started laughing. "You magnificent, vindictive genius. You're going to buy the bank that rejected you." "It's a sound business decision," I said, keeping my voice level. "They have infrastructure we need: branches, regulatory approvals, established business accounts. We have the technology and growth trajectory they lack. Classic synergy." "Bullshit. This is revenge." "Can't it be both?" She leaned back, studying me. 50 million won't be enough. Halberg's market cap is around 300 million. 280 million as of this morning, I corrected, and falling. We don't need to buy it all at once, just enough to matter. The presentation that followed was the culmination of months of research. I showed how Halberg's stock was artificially inflated by dividend payments they couldn't sustain, how their commercial real estate portfolio, all those marble lobbies, was becoming a liability as banking moved online, how their elderly board lacked the expertise to navigate digital transformation. "They're a melting ice cube," I concluded. "We can wait for them to dissolve, or we can accelerate the process." Keiko's partners deliberated for 2 weeks. The final offer exceeded my ask, 75 million for a new fund, with ClearStep as the managing entity. The terms were complex, involving preferred shares and conversion rights. But the bottom line was simple. I now had a war chest. We moved carefully at first. Shell companies acquired small positions in Halberg stock, never enough to trigger disclosure requirements. I hired a team of analysts to identify every pension fund and mutual fund with Halberg exposure. Many were already looking for exits as the stock stagnated. The first major breakthrough came from the Brentonville Teachers Pension Fund. They held 5% of Halberg, and their fund manager was tired of watching returns diminish while executive compensation increased. "The board keeps promising a turnaround," he told me over lunch, "but I've got teachers counting on this money. If you're offering market rate plus 10%, I said, cash deal, closing in 30 days. His handshake felt like the first domino falling. Word spreads in small towns. The firefighters' union wanted to know more. Then the hospital systems endowment. None of them knew about the others. We were careful about that. But each saw the same writing on the wall. Halberg wasn't their future. By winter, 18 months after my loan rejection, our coalition controlled 31% of Halberg Capital Solutions. Not enough for outright control, but enough to demand board representation. Enough to ask uncomfortable questions at shareholder meetings. The night we crossed the 30% threshold, my team celebrated with champagne in our print shop office. I stood apart, looking at the numbers on my screen. Tomorrow, I'd file the required disclosures. Tomorrow, Dean Porter and Linda Crass would learn what I'd been building in the shadows. "You good?" Tony asked, joining me by the window. They still don't know it's me, I said. The acquisition fund is structured through 3 layers of LLCs. On paper, it's just institutional investors making rational decisions. When do you tell them? I thought about conference room B, about Dean's dismissive laugh, about Linda's pearls and condescension. When I'm ready to walk back through those doors, when the percentage is high enough that they can't stop me. And then? Then I teach them the same lesson they taught me. I turn back to my screen, pulling up the latest shareholder registry. That business is just business, nothing personal. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Brentonville, covering the old brick buildings and chain restaurants in uniform white, somewhere across town. Halberg's executives were probably sleeping soundly, secure in their positions and pensions. They had maybe 3 months of peace left, 4 at the most. I opened a new spreadsheet and began planning the endgame. The emergency board meeting was called for a Tuesday morning in March. I knew because I'd orchestrated it, though my name appeared nowhere on the agenda. Halberg's executives thought they were gathering to address concerning shareholder activity. They had no idea they were attending their own execution. By 7 a.m., I was in the parking lot, sitting in a rented Tesla instead of my old Honda. I watched Dean Porter arrive in his Mercedes, Linda Crass in her Lexus, the other board members in their parade of luxury vehicles. They walked into the building like they owned it. They were wrong. At 8:47 a.m., our final purchase cleared. A small family trust, tired of diminishing returns, sold us their 3% stake. Combined with the previous acquisitions through our shell companies, we now controlled 51.3% of Halberg Capital Solutions. I waited until 8:55 to enter the building. The security guard, still the same one from my employee days, did a double take. Ms. Monroe, haven't seen you in, must be 2 years now. 18 months, I corrected, signing the visitor log. I'm here for the board meeting. His confusion was evident, but he printed my badge without question. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt both endless and too quick. My heels clicked against the marble with more authority than I'd ever felt in my old flats. Outside the boardroom, Dean's assistant tried to intercept me. Excuse me, this is a closed session. Not anymore. I handed her the folder I'd been carrying. Please deliver this to the board immediately. She glanced at the first page, saw the shareholding disclosure, and her face went pale. Without another word, she knocked and entered the boardroom. I counted to 10, then followed. The scene that greeted me was worth every sleepless night, every humiliation, every dollar scraped together. 7 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning horror. Linda Crass half stood, her pearls catching the light. What is the meaning of this? The meaning, I said, taking an empty chair at the far end of the table, is that North Star Acquisition Fund now controls 51.3% of Halberg Capital Solutions. As you'll see in the documentation, North Star is a wholly owned subsidiary of ClearStep Financial Technologies, which means I now control this company. Dean Porter's face cycled through red to purple. This is impossible. The disclosures were filed precisely according to SEC regulations, I interrupted. Each acquisition was under the 5% threshold until this morning. My lawyers assured me everything is perfectly legal. Business is business, right? Dean? The folder made its way around the table, each board member reading with increasing alarm. I let the silence stretch, savoring it the way they'd savored my desperation 18 months ago. You can't do this, Linda finally said, her voice cracking. There are procedures, bylaws, which give majority shareholders the right to call for immediate board restructuring. I opened my own folder. Effective immediately, I'm calling for the resignation of all current board members. You can do this gracefully, or we can vote. Either way, you're done. This is revenge, Dean spat. Petty, vindictive. No. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. Revenge would be making you beg for a $5,000 loan to save your house, then laughing in your face. This is business. Your leadership has failed. The company is hemorrhaging customers and burning cash to maintain an unsustainable dividend. Your technology infrastructure is 2 decades out of date. You've prioritized executive compensation over innovation. Any competent board would have removed you years ago. And you think you can do better? Linda's voice dripped condescension, even now. You're a glorified web designer with delusions. I'm the CEO of a fintech platform with 150,000 active users, processing 50 million in monthly transactions, with year-over-year growth of 400%. I let the numbers hang in the air. While you were giving yourselves bonuses, I was building the future you couldn't envision. The only delusion in this room is your belief that you're still in charge. I pulled out the resignation letters I'd had prepared. Sign these now, and you'll receive the severance packages outlined in your contracts. Fight me, and I'll call for a forensic audit of executive compensation during the company's decline. Your choice. One by one, they signed. Linda's hand shook as she wrote her name. Dean threw his pen down like a child. The others, the ones whose names I'd never bothered learning, signed in defeated silence. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared to leave. Security will escort you to your offices. You have 1 hour to collect personal items. Company property stays, including laptops and phones. Standard procedure for terminated executives. I'm sure you understand. You can't, Dean started. I can, I do. I am. I stood, smoothing my skirt. Oh. And Dean, that Mercedes in the parking lot was at least through the company. You'll want to check on that. We're reviewing all executive perks effective immediately. The boardroom emptied slowly, 7 broken figures shuffling out like a funeral procession. I waited until the door closed, then moved to the head of the table. The chair was still warm from Linda's presence. Tony entered, followed by Marcus and Sarah Kim. My new board of directors, young and hungry and ready to transform this fossilized institution. Holy shit, you actually did it, Marcus breathed, looking around the wood-paneled room. We did it, I corrected. And now the real work begins. Sarah, I want a complete technical audit within 2 weeks. Marcus, customer retention is your priority. Stop the bleeding before we rebuild. Tony, work with legal on the transition announcements. What about you? Tony asked. I picked up the nameplate that read Linda Crass, board chair, and dropped it in the trash. I have a meeting with the employees in an hour. They deserve to know their new leadership actually understands what they do. You keeping any of the old guard? The ones worth keeping. Janet Morrison is getting promoted to Senior VP of Customer Relations. 30 years of frontline experience beats an MBA every time. I paused at the window, looking down at the parking lot where I'd once slept in my car. And we're converting half the executive parking into employee spaces. Symbols matter. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like the old regime's relevance, visible for a moment, then gone. I thought about calling the press, making a statement, celebrating publicly. But that could wait. First, I had a company to rebuild. And this time, I wouldn't need anyone's permission to do it right. The transformation began immediately. No gradual transitions, no gentle phasing out. I wielded change like a scalpel, cutting away the rot with precision. Day 1. I eliminated the executive dining room. The mahogany tables and leather chairs were donated to a community center. The space became an employee wellness room with meditation pods and nursing stations for new mothers. Dean Porter's wine collection, discovered in a temperature-controlled closet, was auctioned for charity. Day 3. Every middle manager was required to spend 1 day per week on the front lines, answering phones, processing transactions, facing the customers they'd forgotten existed. The resistance was immediate and vocal. I didn't care. This is insulting, Gregory Marsh, VP of Commercial Lending, complained during an all-hands meeting. I have an MBA from Wharton, and our average customer has 2 jobs and a high school diploma. I replied, if you can't serve them respectfully, you can't serve them at all. Anyone uncomfortable with that should update their LinkedIn profiles. He resigned that afternoon. I promoted his assistant, who'd been doing most of his work anyway. The technical overhaul was brutal. Sarah Kim's audit revealed systems so antiquated that one critical database was literally running on a server in a closet, cooling itself with a box fan. The integration with ClearStep's infrastructure required 16-hour days and more caffeine than was medically advisable. "We need to shut down for maintenance," Sarah warned. "At least a weekend." No. I pulled up customer data. You know what happens when banks close unexpectedly? People panic. We do this live, in phases. No customer loses access to their money, not for a minute. It took 6 weeks of careful coordination, but we migrated every system without a single hour of downtime. The press called it unprecedented. I called it what customers deserve. The real resistance came from institutional shareholders who hadn't sold to me. They organized, demanding meetings, threatening lawsuits. I faced them in the same boardroom where I'd been humiliated. "You're destroying shareholder value," accused Harold Weatherby, representing a pension fund. "The dividend cuts, the restructuring costs. I'm building sustainable value," I corrected. "Your dividends were borrowed money, paid out while the company rotted. We're investing in growth instead of executive bonuses. If you don't like it, I'm still buying shares at market price." The market price has dropped 12%. Temporary volatility. Watch what happens in 6 months. They didn't wait 6 months. Most sold within 3, letting me consolidate control further. The ones who stayed got to witness something they'd never seen at Halberg: actual innovation. We launched Halberg Clear Accounts, traditional banking backed by ClearStep's technology. No minimum balances, no predatory fees, multilingual support, and financial literacy tools built in. The waiting list hit 10,000 within a week. The culmination came during the rebranding announcement. I'd kept the Halberg name, not out of respect, but because I wanted everyone to see what it could become under proper leadership. The press conference was held in the old executive dining room, now filled with employees instead of executives. "Some of you may remember," I began, looking directly at the Tribune reporter who'd covered my original story, "that I once asked this institution for a $5,000 loan. I was denied, told my vision for inclusive banking was unrealistic." I paused, letting the irony settle. Today, Halberg Capital Solutions has provided over $50 million in microloans to underserved communities. We've eliminated overdraft fees, saving our customers an average of $300 per year. We've hired from the communities we serve, promoting based on merit rather than pedigree. And we're profitable, genuinely profitable, not propped up by financial engineering. The questions came fast. Was this revenge? How did I feel about the executives I'd removed? What was next? "This was never about revenge," I said, finding I actually meant it. "It was about proving that finance can be both profitable and ethical. That innovation comes from understanding struggle, not inheriting privilege. That a company's true value lies in serving its customers, not extracting from them." After the conference, I found Janet Morrison in her new corner office, the one that used to belong to Linda Krass. She was training a group of young tellers, teaching them to see beyond credit scores to human potential. "You know what the best part is?" she said, catching my eye. "Linda called me yesterday. Wanted to know if I could put in a good word for her at another bank. Said she'd always valued my experience." We both laughed, but there was no cruelty in it. Just the satisfied exhaustion of people who'd survived and transformed. That night, I stood in my office, not Linda's old space, but a modest room on the 3rd floor, close to the development team. The marble and mahogany were gone, replaced by whiteboards covered in product roadmaps and customer feedback. My phone buzzed. An email from Dean Porter, sent from his personal account. "Congratulations on the quarterly results. I was wrong about you, about everything. Dean." I archived it without responding, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. The student had become the teacher. The rejected had become the redeemer. And the company that had tried to diminish me now carried my vision forward. Through the window, I could see the parking lot where everything had started. The space where I'd slept in my car was now marked Employee of the Month. This month, It belonged to a young woman who'd started as a janitor and was now training to be a loan officer. The circle was complete, but the work continued. Tomorrow, we'd launch a program for formerly incarcerated individuals to access banking. Next month, partnerships with community colleges for financial literacy. Next year, who knew? I'd bought their company not to destroy it, but to prove what it could have been all along. The greatest revenge, I'd learned, wasn't tearing down what hurt you. It was building something so much better that the old way became obsolete. The lights of Brentonville sparkled below, each one representing someone who deserved better than they'd been given. Someone like I'd been, 18 months and a lifetime ago. I grabbed my jacket and headed home. Not to a car in a parking lot, but to an actual apartment, modest but mine. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new resistance, new possibilities. But tonight, I'd proven my point. They'd denied my loan of $5,000. I'd bought their company, and I'd made it worth something. The final board meeting of my first year as CEO fell on a Tuesday, exactly 18 months after they'd denied my loan. I arrived early, not to savor the moment, but to review the numbers one last time. Revenue up 340%. Customer base expanded to $400,000. Employee satisfaction at an all-time high. The transformation was complete, but I felt no triumph. Only a strange emptiness. "You're brooding again," Tony observed, finding me in the boardroom at 6 a.m. "Not brooding, thinking." "About?" I gestured at the renovated space. "About how none of this feels like I thought it would. I spent so long focused on getting here. I never thought about what came after." The meeting itself was routine. Quarterly projections, expansion plans, the mundane machinery of success. But as I walked through the building afterward, something felt different. In the break room, employees were laughing over coffee, real laughter, not the nervous kind. In the customer service center, representatives spoke with genuine warmth. The fear that had permeated these halls was gone. I found myself in the lobby, staring at the wall where portraits of former executives once hung. We'd replaced them with photos of customers, Maria with her food truck, small business owners, families buying their first homes through our programs, real people living real lives, made possible by banking that saw them as human. "Ms. Monroe?" A young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." "For?" "I applied for a teller position last year. Under the old management, they rejected me because of a bankruptcy from medical bills. You gave me a chance. Now I'm in the management training program." She paused. "I just wanted you to know it mattered." After she left, I stood there for a long moment. This, not the boardroom victory, not the share price, not even the vindication. This was why I'd fought so hard. That afternoon, I did something I'd been postponing. I cleaned out the last box from my car living days. Inside were the rejection letter, my original business plan, and a photo Tony had taken of me coding on her couch at 3 a.m. Artifacts from a different life. I was debating what to do with them when my assistant knocked. "Someone here to see you. Says it's personal." Linda Crass stood in my doorway, looking smaller than I remembered. Her pearls were gone, replaced by a simple necklace. The designer suit had given way to department store clothes. She looked human. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all I'm asking." I nodded to a chair. She sat carefully, as if afraid it might break. "I've been working at a credit union in Springfield," she began. "Entry level. Processing loan applications." A bitter smile. "Karma, right?" I said nothing. "Last week, a young woman came in, 23, 2 jobs, needed $3,000 for nursing school prerequisites, perfect payment history on her car loan. But her credit score was too low. Policy said, deny. She met my eyes. I approved it anyway. Told my manager she reminded me of someone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I finally understand what you were trying to build. What we stopped you from building." She stood. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a job or anything else. I just..." Needed you to know that I learned something, even if it was too late. She left without another word. I sat with that for a while, then returned to the box of memories. Instead of throwing them away, I created a small display in my office, a reminder of where I'd been and why I couldn't stop pushing forward. The sun was setting as I prepared to leave. In the parking lot, my Tesla sat in a regular spot. I'd eliminated reserved executive parking entirely. As I walked past the space where I'd once slept, I noticed someone sitting in their car, laptop balanced on the steering wheel, typing furiously. I knocked on the window. A young man looked up, startled and embarrassed. "Working late?" I asked. Yes. "I'm sorry. I know loitering isn't." "What are you building?" He hesitated, then showed me his screen. An app for coordinating food distribution to homeless shelters. Rough but promising. "Come back tomorrow," I said, handing him my card. "Ask for the Innovation Lab. We have a program for community-focused startups. Rent-free space, mentorship, and maybe some seed funding if the idea's solid." His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and hope. You're Rachel Monroe. I read about what you did here, how I got lucky," I interrupted, "and how I'm trying to make sure others don't need luck, just opportunity." I left him there, staring at my card like it might disappear. Tomorrow, he'd either show up or he wouldn't. But the door would be open. The same door that had been slammed in my face would stay open for everyone who deserved a chance. Walking to my car, I pulled out my phone and deleted Dean Porter's email. Then, on impulse, I composed a new one. To all Hallberg employees, 18 months ago, I asked this institution for $5,000 and was denied. Today, we've provided over $100 million in loans to people who were told they weren't worth the risk. This isn't my victory. It's ours. And we're just getting started. R.E.M.Z. I hit send and drove home through the streets of Brentonville, past the community center using our donated furniture, past the small businesses thriving with our loans, past the people living their lives a little easier because we'd chosen to see them differently. They'd denied my loan of $5,000. I'd bought their company. But the real victory? I'd made sure no one else would be denied the chance to prove them wrong. The parking lot where I'd once slept was full of cars now. Employees working late not because they had to, but because they believed in what we were building. The glass doors that had once shut me out reflected a different person walking away. Not bitter, not triumphant, just ready for tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Rachel's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special. Hit that subscribe button and let's continue this journey together.